suffering and the poor. Their undisputed leader was a stunning and charismatic noblewoman called Lady Petronella. The flame-haired Petronella was beloved by the people of Rome, despite her openly Christian practices, as she was the daughter and heiress of one of Rome's oldest families. She used her wealth generously for the highest good of the Republic, and preached only of the need for love and tolerance. If Petronella and her compassionates had been the only kind of Christian in Rome, this onslaught of terrible bloodshed would likely never have begun. But the group of Christians that Pius referred to as the fanatics were another story altogether. In contrast to the compassionates, who spoke of their Messiah in warm and devoted tones as the great teacher of a spiritual path they called the way of love, the fanatics screeched of the one true God who would eliminate all others and bring about a reign of terror for the unbelievers at a time of final judgment. The Romans were deeply offended by this perspective, and the fanatics compounded the offense by insisting that life on earth did not matter, and that only the afterlife was of importance. Such a philosophy, such a craven disregard for the gift of life that the gods bestowed upon mortals, was absolute sacrilege to the Roman priests and their followers. It was incomprehensible to a culture of people who celebrated the experience of the physical senses in their countless spiritual and civic festivals. To most Romans, the fanatics were an enigma born out of madness, a group to be shunned if not feared. Thus, it was the fanatics who raised the ire of the Roman people even when there were no natural disasters to contend with. But when a deadly influenza outbreak struck an affluent Roman suburb, the priests of Saturn began to cry for the blood of Christians to appease their god. In the center of this growing drama was a wealthy Roman widow, the Lady Felicita. Felicita had converted to Christianity when, overcome by grief following the sudden death of her noble and beloved husband, she had turned her back on the Roman gods. It was said that, left alone to raise 7 sons without a father, she went mad with the anguish of her loss. Felicita was visited by Christians who offered her comfort in her mourning, and she ultimately found strength and solace in the fanatic's extreme perspective on the absolute importance of the afterlife. In this ideal, Felicita was consoled that her husband was in a better place where she would join him one day, and they would be together with their children as a family in heaven. While Felicita burned with the passion of the newly converted, most of the nobles in her community were not overly upset by her behavior. Felicita would spend hours each day on her knees in prayer, but most felt that this was her own business. In addition, Felicita was charitable and generous, donating portions of her dead husband's fortune to the building of a hospital and compelling her older sons to contribute physical labor to help the infirm. As a result, Felicita's strong and beautiful children were very popular with the people of the Roman suburb in which they dwelled. The boys ranged in age from the golden-haired youngest, called Marshall, who was in his 7th summer, to the tall and athletic eldest, Januarius, who was 20 years on Earth. The world in which Felicita and her sons lived remained relatively peaceful until the influenza swept into their town. It struck intermittently and at random, but those who were afflicted by it rarely survived the extreme fevers that accompanied the retching and convulsions. When the firstborn son of a Saturnian priest succumbed to the illness, the distraught man rallied the population to join him in accusing Felicita and her sons of bringing down the wrath of the gods upon them. Clearly, Saturn had punished his own priest to make his point clear. The Romans would need to be strong in their opposition to these Christian people who dared to regard their true gods as obsolete. The gods would not stand for it, and certainly not a god such as Saturn, who was the domineering and ruthless patriarch of the Roman pantheon. Hadn't Saturn even devoured his own son when he found him to be disobedient? Felicita and all 7 of her children were subsequently brought before the regional magistrate, Publius. Because of Felicita's noble status, they were not shackled.